All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I am the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and I've recorded more than 5,000 interviews going back to 2003, all of which are available at scotthorton.org. You can also sign up for the podcast feed. The full archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, he's the author of Patriotic Descent, and before that, Ghost Riders of Baghdad, and he writes for us regularly at antiwar.com, and he was an Army officer in Iraq War II and Afghanistan in both surges. Welcome back to the show, Danny Sjursen. Good to talk to you, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
All right, man, so you wrote this thing about the horrible Jake Sullivan. It's on antiwar.com right now. It was published originally at the Sheer Post, I think, is where I first read it. And it's called Biden's Young Hawk, The Case Against Jake Sullivan. So go ahead and tell us the bad news, Danny.
Well, the bad news is that, Sullivan is a disturbing guy. And okay, so are a whole bunch of the Biden bros and sisses, right? I mean, there's nothing too surprising. I've been asked a few times since writing this, well, why Jake Sullivan? Why'd you focus on him? Okay, admittedly, I get blind spots for people. I get manic and sort of obsessed. But this guy's disturbing, but because he is sort of like a sophisticate and he says the right things and he's not a Trump guy, right? I think, he's going to get a pass. He's also someone who works behind the scenes. He's a mind melder. He's somebody who gets very close to the crown and makes himself indispensable to the people he works for. And then, of course, kind of the perfect storm is, and we can get into the details about this guy's record and personality, but as national security advisor, in the constitutionally wildly unbalanced system of today, not only has the executive branch taken over most war making and foreign policy making, but specifically more than state and defense, as you know, the National Security Council, the White House has taken this over. So now you've got a mind melding guy who is going to be the war whisperer at the side of an extremely and historically malleable gut player like Joe Biden. And that's why I picked Sullivan, because I think that, like I said, he's my dark horse candidate for like the key hawk, but he's also my dark horse candidate for maybe the most influential guy in this White House, none of which bodes well.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the common thread through this article is all these different people talking about how competent this guy is. It's really terrifying.
Well, yeah, and it depends, who's saying it, right? Who's saying that he's so competent? I mean, you got Hillary Clinton bragging about, joking with her husband about, he went to Yale and he's super smart. And Bill's like, well, if he learns to play the saxophone, watch out. Like as if it's not a bunch of war criminals, like joking vaguely about falling in love with one another, right? And so on CNN, that's fine, right? Everyone's cool with that. But I hear it and I'm saying, well, wait a second, yeah, he gets rave reviews, but he gets rave reviews from mostly horrible people, right? Who've done horrible things and have driven this country just completely away from any lingering sense of being a republic with a small R. So, yeah, I mean, that's what scares me about him. Is
it sounds like what they're saying is he can run an office really well, and that is scary,
Right?
Not that he makes wise decisions. Just that he can actually, once he makes a bad decision, he can carry it out in short order.
He is a company man's company man, except it appears that there's two other real big problems with him. Number one, his reflex truly is to hawkishness. He appears to be, at least on some level, a believer in sort of this indispensable nation, American exceptionalism. Now, we could discuss why that is. Is it because he likes it in the sense that it creates jobs for wonks like him and his ambition? But we can table that for a moment. And the second thing is, you can't prove the measure of a man necessarily just from reading everything that's written by or about him. but I have a distinct sense, and like I would really put a lot of money on this. Like I would trust my gut. I'd probably wager one of my two kids. I'm not sure which one I love more. I'll get back to you on the fact that Sullivan does not care about people. I do not think he has any real sense of empathy for costs and victims and outgrowths. That's just something I get from listening to everything that he said in interviews and reading his stuff. There's some funny little lack there. So those two things combined with the fact that he's like, this technocrat's technocrat, company man's company man. I mean, that's disturbing enough. But yeah, he's a middle manager, except he's a really dangerous one because of what he appears to believe and what he appears to not care about, which is people.
I get that same impression too. And where I get it is all these statements where he talks about, part of making these policies is sometimes you get it wrong and things go wrong and there are gray areas. And it's very important now that you always remember that no matter how sure you are that there's, some area where you always can learn more and this and that. And essentially, like he's reducing all of this pain to just learning experiences for young technocrats that, but also kind of like a permission slip, as long as you pray that, don't let me trespass on anybody in the next 7 days, then it's actually okay to trespass on people for the next 7 days. That same sort of, self-absolvement that, sometimes when you back Al-Qaeda in a war, you wish you hadn't later, or you wish you'd maybe given them more weapons sooner or something like that,
Well, yeah, his statements are very interesting because he can't help but sort of out himself. As smart as he is, and I've seen this before, as intelligent as the guy is, at least on the surface, he's a smart guy. He knows the right things to say, but he cannot help himself. People are going to let you know who they are one way or the other, and their language will do it. So he's constantly hedging and he's constantly pivoting. So for example, he'll say in this one part in 2015, he said to the Minnesota Post or whatever, he said, well, of course, it's the right thing to do to be a good person and care about your neighbor, colleagues, and people less fortunate. But, okay, first of all, I don't like a but there, but fine. But
Right.
I've also found that if you want to advance your career and make an impact, you need people who are going to be your champion. And then he pivots back to the good stuff and says, and that means showing them that you're not just in it for yourself. Wait a second. So is he saying you're really not just in it for yourself, or you need to show them that you're not just in it for yourself so you can get the champion? Like,
Yeah, and are you talking
everything
about
about that is weird.
Yeah, and are you talking about you need to pose like you care about powerless people to impress people with more power, or you need to make sure that people with power know that you care about them?
Yeah, it's a really weird phrasing, and he does it a lot. And as you mentioned, when it comes to like Syria and Al Qaeda, supporting Al Qaeda or being on the same side as Al Qaeda, and Libya and Yemen, he's really not apologetic at all. Like every time he's asked about it, he pretty much either defends the motivations for getting in, for Obama getting in, or uh, he'll say, "Well, actually, I still think it was a good idea." I mean, one or the other. He never says it was just awful and there was no reason and we completely were wrong. He's never said that about any of those policies. He either says, "No, I'm pretty much still with it. I still think it was good," or he says, "It didn't turn out so well, but we meant well and we had good reason for thinking it." Or he says, "Actually, I'm not sure yet. I'll let you know," which is what he says about Libya. He says, "I'm still not sure if that was the right thing to do or not, but I'll get back to you." Of course, by then he'll be running America's war policy at age 43 because he's the new best and the brightest, whiz kid like the guys who followed McNamara into office.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that I learned reading your article, which I already knew this about him, but I did not understand, really the background and the extent of it. And I learned this from your piece and then also in the pieces that you linked to here that this is Hillary Clinton's man. Big time.
Yeah, I mean, he reviewed the chapters in her book. I mean, he was the ultimate aide to Hillary Clinton. And of course, the Vox profile said that he was the man behind Hillary's hawkish foreign policy. Now, he certainly is hawkish in his own right. I mean, if you read everything he writes for Foreign Affairs, he makes that pretty clear. It's hard to say whether he's the man behind it or he's just someone who aligned with her, right? But either way, he's with her on every level. I mean, one Obama aide said that Jake did everything for Secretary Clinton. He was at her side in like 100 countries, and she said that he was discreet, earnest, and brilliant in the book that he proofread for her. So I guess it makes sense. She had to say something nice. He was going to be the reviewer of it, right? He was going to review the chapters. But I think the interesting thing there is earnest and brilliant. Okay, that's fine. But discreet, that's an interesting term. That's a Clinton-esque term, isn't it? For somebody like her, right? For someone
It's
who's
not very
kind of
discreet of her to use that term to describe him.
right, right, right. But I do
He's
think
a
it's
guy who is very
instructive.
trustworthy with my secrets, my deep, dark secrets about where all my bodies are buried.
I mean, right? That's a weird word to use, discreet. That these people out themselves, man. But yeah, he's a Hillary guy. He jumped ship to the Obama team to like help him with debates and stuff after he'd been prepping Hillary's debates. But he pretty quickly, jumped back into the Hillary camp. And Ben Rhodes, said of him that he was pretty much always in line, with Hillary. He said Jake's in line with Hillary, and on the spectrum of people in the Obama administration, he tended to favor more assertive U.S. engagement on issues and, quote, responses that would incorporate some military elements. So, that's our new national security advisor, America. Congratulations.
Hey, y'all, here's the thing. Donate $100 to the Scott Horton Show, and you can get a QR code commodity disc as my gift to you. It's a 1-ounce silver disc with a QR code on the back. You take a picture of it with your phone, and it gives you the instant spot price and lets you know what that ounce of silver is worth on the market in Federal Reserve notes in real time. It's the future of currency in the past, too. CommodityDiscs.com, or just go to scotthorton.org/donate. Hey guys, Scott Horton here for ExpandDesigns.com. Harley Abbott and his crew do an outstanding job designing, building, and maintaining my sites, and they'll do great work for you. You need a new website? Go to expanddesigns.com/Scott and save $500. Hey guys, check out Listen and Think audiobooks. They're at listenandthink.com and, of course, on audible.com. And they feature my book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, as well as brand new out Inside Syria by our friend Reese Erlich, and a lot of other great books, mostly by libertarians there. Reese might be one exception, but essentially they're all libertarian audiobooks. And here's how you can get a lifetime subscription to Listen and Think audiobooks. Just donate $100 to the Scott Horton Show at scotthorton.org/donate. I had no idea this anecdote about how exactly Richard Holbrooke died. I knew it was a heart attack, and I knew that he wanted to negotiate with the Taliban, but I really learned something here, and I can just picture it way too well, far too easily, what this scene must have been like. But can you tell the people for us, please?
Yeah, so this is interesting because, well, Afghanistan better than anybody, and this is, big news even today, right? The discussion of what's going to happen with Afghanistan with Biden. But, Jake was in the Clinton camp. He went everywhere with her. He was at her side. In fact, if you look at photos, if you ever just Google Jake Sullivan and like go to the images on Google, he's like always in the background of these like Oval Office pictures and stuff. He's just like the guy leering back there and taking notes, Anyway, I think he's playing hangman. But anyway, he's in the room. I believe he's 34 when he takes over. So he's like 35 years old. Okay. He's sitting in on a meeting with Richard Holbrooke is there, Hillary is there, and Holbrooke is arguing that, listen, the Obama administration's position at the time was that the Taliban agreeing to, not support Al Qaeda any longer or not harbor Al Qaeda was a precondition to even begin talks. And Holbrooke was saying, like, we got to start just getting the ball rolling, talking to these guys. So yes, that should be the precondition for a full agreement, but let's just start talking. And of course, Hillary was like wildly opposed to this. Even Obama, at least as an administration, as a position, they were against it. And Jake was way in line with Hillary. And Holbrooke is like fired up about it, and he's literally pleading with them in the room, like, listen to me, like, I know of what I speak, you need to start talking to these guys, blah blah blah, and his heart bursts like there in the room. And so Sullivan is there for it. And I just feel like, anecdotes, sure, they're interesting, human interest, but sometimes they really are, instructive. And I think that is one, because that's who, Jake Sullivan is coming into this Biden administration now, that's gonna make some sort of call on Afghanistan pretty soon, theoretically. And I don't know, it just doesn't particularly bode well. I think it's an interesting story.
Man, I'm afraid that that's how I'm going to die 30 years from now. I won't be talking to anybody with power, but I'll be sitting there arguing why we got to get out of Afghanistan and then drop dead of a goddamn heart attack.
Maybe I'll be a guest on the show or sitting in the room with you. I think there's a good chance. I'll be older than Jake Sullivan.
We got to withdraw the troops, I tell you.
Right. Could happen. Yeah.
All right, so... Yeah, I mean, and can't you just see that Holbrook going, and because he was such a personality, that's why everybody hated him so much. Like, God damn it, listen to me, you gotta do it. Like, he must have been going off. Damn it, Jake, you're being unreasonable. And then fell down dead on the ground.
Yeah, I almost wish that there was. I mean, I guess it'd be kind of macabre, but I almost wish there was footage of it. I would like to, or at least the transcript. I'd like to hear what he was saying. I want to know what Holbrook was saying and how he was phrasing it.
Yeah. Man. All right, now, so we got to talk about this because it's just the best thing in the whole world. I think there's so much to it. AQ is on our side in Syria. Danny?
Yeah, so that's pretty a pretty famous Jake Sullivan email from the Podesta emails and WikiLeaks and everything. So Max Blumenthal in the book, which I thought was really good, The Management of Savagery, I believe he's got it as like an epigraph to the book. He kind of has that as one of the quotes. And so it's February 2012, and Sullivan types what's now kind of an infamous email to Clinton, and what he says is, and it's so offhanded, because I've read the emails before, after reading the full thing, and he says, on Syria, he says, Al Qaeda is on our side. Other than that, everything is as expected. That's the second part that I didn't put in this version, but I've typed it before. He says Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria, like basically ... Other than that, everything's going about as expected, and that's it. And I read almost all of Sullivan's emails to Clinton of any substance, and most of them are garbage and just sycophant, like just terrible, just fawning over her. But that's interesting because he was a big proponent, like Clinton was, of early on of intervention against Assad, of getting involved in Syria on some level, including up to and including military force, right? So no fly zones, maybe actual military intervention on the ground. And, he was almost cheering this, that Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria, which to me says that he really is willing to kind of go whichever way the wind blows to get his preferred policy or to please his boss or both. It doesn't seem to have bothered him at all.
Yeah, no, right? It's just like a cute little sort of irony, right? That like, isn't this funny? He doesn't say, geez, boss, in this article, Ayman al-Zawahiri is saying that he wants all good Muslims to go and overthrow Assad, and I think that maybe we should call a meeting and re-examine our policy, which really could be helping our enemy in a way that maybe we hadn't anticipated thus far. Instead, he's just saying, tee-hee, isn't it ironic and funny that Zawahiri's endorsing the same thing we're doing?
Well, yeah, I think that he enjoys this kind of insider access, and he enjoys the kind of flipped nature of the comment that he got to give. And he also, it's hard to know sometimes, chicken or egg with Jake. Is it that he's a huge proponent of the policy in, say, Syria or Libya himself? Or is it that he knows that his prime patron, Hillary, is, And so he wants to show her that he's like more holier than the Hillary,
Yeah.
more Catholic than the Pope on these things. So, for example, and he really does do everything possible to just blow smoke up the butt of his bosses. So he writes this very long memo about what he thinks the State Department's public relations sort of policy or position should be on Hillary reference Libya. And so I believe this is also in 2012 or maybe early 13. And what he says is he brags, basically. He says that, Hillary's been the public face of the U.S. effort in Libya, and we should highlight this, and that she was instrumental in, quote, tightening the noose around Gaddafi and his regime. You know, it's like he's just so flip about it. And he's like, this is a good thing. This is a good thing, right? And then even now, you go back and looking retrospectively now, 7 years after that, in 2019, we know what's happened with Libya. We know about the refugees. We know about the people drowning trying to get across the Mediterranean, and the arms and the fighters that went across into the whole Sahel, and just the disaster within Libya. And he says, well, I've struggled with the question of if we had to do it over again. This is a quote. Would we have participated in it? And I don't have a definitive answer on that yet. I mean, it's just lifeless language. It's like the way he speaks is the verbal equivalent of like dead shark eyes. Do you know what I mean? That's what I get from his quotes.
And what he means is, yeah, I'm guilty as hell. Yeah, we got a lot of people killed. It's an absolute catastrophe. But what can I say? I can't say that it's great, but I can't say that, I deserve to be buried under the Supermax in Florence, Colorado for it either. So how about I'll just say that it's too soon to tell. That's a good one. Give me a break. Too soon to tell. 50,000 people at least are dead. Probably more than that.
Yeah, we don't even know. And of course, it reminds me of that Bush era stuff. Well, history will judge. History is going to vindicate us. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah. Nope, your pirate radio host is judging you right now. That was how he answered that then. The same thing today. All right, now, and by the way, I got to mention this too because it's important about that Sullivan email about Al-Qaeda in Syria is that just about 2 weeks later, after that email, on February the 28th, Hillary was interviewed on CBS, and this used to be the clip in the intro of Hillary saying, "Are we supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria?" And what happened was the CBS reporter is asking her, why aren't we doing more to overthrow Assad? And we all know that she was a hawk all through 2011, and she spent the rest of 2012 urging Obama to do more and more all the time, which he did. But anyway, at that moment, she was, as Secretary of State, being forced to defend Obama's policy of not carpet bombing Damascus. And so she refers to Jake Sullivan's email, and which had that Reuters story attached about Zawahiri supporting the revolution. So she invokes that, and she says, well, we know that Ayman al-Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda has endorsed the revolution in Syria. Are we backing Al-Qaeda in Syria? And so, we know that she saw that email, very, strong evidence there that she saw that, and she referred to it a week or two later from our point of view, that that's actually not so cute and funny. And that actually, if we're overthrowing Assad, we're doing the bidding of Ayman al-Zawahiri, the butcher of New York City. And that can't be right? And she actually goes on to say, and so when we look at like a good, steady, secular, moderate opposition that's fit to take the place of the current government of Syria, she says, we don't see that. And we don't have anyone to take the place there. So we have to be very careful about this. And the fact that she refused to listen to her own answer there and continue to take the hawkish side that, oh no, there's got to be a militia somewhere that we could build up to be powerful enough to take on all jihadists on this side. I won't say left or right, but all the jihadists on the Sunni, bin Ladenite side, and the Assad government, Iran, Hezbollah, and their Russian backers and everybody else and create some moderate new democracy for Syria. That's completely crazy. A total fantasy, as Obama himself called it. And yet they went on with it anyway. So I bring that up just to show that just how self-aware these people are when it comes to this treason. They know what they're doing and they know better, and then they do it anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact that Hillary was willing to pivot on that and use the email to make a completely different point than Sullivan was trying to make, and a completely different point than I think she was supporting,
Right.
because she did have to become the mouthpiece and play at least a little bit nice with the Obama position. It does show you how calculating these folks are, and they're really good insider players, and they are fully cognizant of what they're doing, which I think is even more of an indictment, and why they probably all should be in Florence. Like you said earlier on in our chat, you were talking about how Sullivan is always mentioning how it's like bad things happen, and it's tough stuff when you're making policy, but
Yeah.
this whole thing about Syria and then also Libya and also Yemen, it reminds me of that. I mean, this lifeless language that people like Hillary use and that people like Jake use. I mean, he's talking in a New Yorker interview again about, this is last year, about the overall like shortfalls of the Obama administration, right? And specifically the question was about like Libya and Syria and Yemen, right? And he said, quote, "Others have said more eloquently than me that hypocrisy and inconsistency are the necessary byproducts of a foreign policy that both has to look out for our interest and try as best as it can to advance that." I mean, that's a dangerous 20 words to string together right there, And if words could take human form, that would be like Sullivan's sentence, and also Hillary's in some way. Like it's a apology for legit war crimes. If you add up all of these instances of policy that Sullivan was very complicit in those 3 or 4 places I just mentioned, hundreds of thousands of deaths, tens of thousands more.
Yeah.
Children.
And when it comes to Libya, there's 3 or 4 different stories that describe the meetings in the Oval Office. I guess they were all kind of tattletaling on each other. But where you had all the hawks on one side and all the doves on the other arguing about Libya. And, to be a fly on the wall, I think, would just be maddening. To read about it is bad enough. That essentially some guy like this and a few others, Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power and whoever, sitting around on a couple of couches, they get to decide whether to start a war or not. Well, I don't know. I kind of think we should. Well, Susan agrees with me. Well, I don't think so. What about you, Samantha? No, well, I agree with Tom. And Tom and Bob, they think that maybe we should wait a little while. Well, whatever, blah, blah. And so what do you think, Barack? Go ahead and start it. And then that's the war. It's just
Right.
These people. You could take, I don't know, any 10 people out of a restaurant somewhere and say, okay, you guys are in charge of making up this stuff. Why should anyone have the power to do this? To kill thousands and thousands of people. I mean, I don't even think that Congress should have the power to declare war. But for God's sake, just a bunch of self-important blowhards like Jake Sullivan and Samantha Power who are thinking of themselves first, and how this is like Joe Biden, how this is going to look on their record that they were hawkish and muscular and tough and not wimpy so that they can have more power someday, It's just crazy. It's like a episode of the Twilight Zone or something, except we're living in it so we don't realize how kind of backwards in it is,
When I read this stuff, and as I've studied it over the years more and more, I'm increasingly convinced that there aren't any adults minding the store. And what you're describing, it really, it feels like the inter-office dynamics in that 90s cult classic movie Office Space, except instead of fixing the software for Y2K, they're running the war machine. Their product is death. But otherwise, it feels like that. I mean, it's just that kind of internal dynamics. And you
Right.
look at someone like Sullivan and all the other, Samantha Power and all these people, and I mean, it's amazing that it's amazing that any human being gets to make those decisions, but these people making those calls so just flippantly and just offhandedly and for all the wrong motives, and there's probably a little bit of a Mean Girls aspect to it. Who's mad at who? Who didn't answer whose email fast enough? I mean, that's what it feels like, and it's not even a joke when I'm saying that, right? I'm not even being that sarcastic because it's pretty close to how this goes.
Yep. Absolutely. And seriously, there were 3 or 4 or 5, I don't remember all the footnotes now. I know one of them was Josh Rogan. But there were 3 or 4 or 5 that all told the same story from a different point of view about this was the argument in the Oval Office when we decided to do the Libya war or not, or the last big meeting we had before Obama decided by himself a couple days later while he was in Brazil to go ahead and announce the start of the war. But it was told, and it really is, it's just like reading the Bob Woodward books. I mean, they're full of ridiculous propaganda in a way, but they are based on the primary sources of interviews with these people. And so you can sort of take their word for it about their relationships with each other. And you're right. It's exactly like just some office full of some people. And the fact that they call themselves experts and make the decisions about war and peace and all of that is completely, you could change it out. They're the same group of people making decisions for the paper company on that Steve Carell show, or whatever it is. They're just some schmucks, just like everybody else, is the point, only with essentially unlimited power at their fingertips.
Yeah. And the person in charge, the decider, matters to some extent, but it's very rarely the right person, or it's very rarely the right personality type. So you have Obama in charge of that crew, and Obama is like the ultimate hedger. He's a political insider, right? He's always figuring out like, okay, what do I need to do in order to maintain the right amount of support and have Congress behind me on what I really care about. And so he's not going to take firm stands most of the time, right? And then now we have Biden, and you know, he's he's problematic in a whole set of other ways. Some of them are similar to that, but he's not an intellectually curious guy, right? And so the influence of those people is heightened in the case when you have a chief executive who is like Obama or is like Biden. And there's no adult minding the store even at the very top in that sense. And so these insiders can have that influence. And there's just something about the type of human being that rises to the positions of Jake Sullivan. I mean, not just anybody can become Jake Sullivan. Even not just any Yale guy can become Jake Sullivan, right? It's a certain personality type that is just exceedingly ambitious above all, and just knows how to like knife fight intellectually and in terms of like office politics. It's a dangerous man. And I'm reminded of Kurt Vonnegut's quip, true terror is to wake up one morning and realize that your high school class is running the country. And when I look at Sullivan, I feel that way, except he's worse than anyone I went to high school with.
Hey, y'all, let me tell you about the Libertarian Institute's latest book, What Social Animals Owe to Each Other, by our executive editor, the great Sheldon Richman. For decades, Richman has been explaining libertarianism to the left from the left. He makes a strong case that any honest liberal, progressive, or leftist actually should be libertarians, since in fact it is freedom itself that provides what y'all want. Richman argues the case for liberty and peace, the human spirit and social cooperation, for true liberalism, libertarianism, against the corrupt forces of statism, corporatism, and violence. What Social Animals Owe to Each Other by Sheldon Richman. Now available at libertarianinstitute.org/books. Hey guys, Scott Horton here for Mike Swanson's great book, The War State. It's about the rise of the military-industrial complex and the power elite after World War II, during the administrations of Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, and Jack Kennedy. It's a very enlightening take on this definitive era on America's road to world empire. The War State by Mike Swanson. Find it in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org. Hey y'all, Scott here. If you want a real education in history and economics, you should check out Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Tom and a really great group of professors and experts have put together an entire education of everything they didn't teach you in school but should have. Follow through from the link in the margin at scotthorton.org for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Hey man, what's Macro Advisory Partners?
Oh, Macro. Okay, so that's his favorite consultancy. I mean, everyone in the Biden crew follows the same archetype as we've talked about. They go to an Ivy League school, they apprentice for a congressperson, right? Then they work in Obama's administration at the mid-level. And then while they're in their kind of like holding pattern of the Trump years, they do two things. They work at a think tank, and then they also are consultants somewhere. Now, most of them are with West Exec Advisors, which was the Flournoy Blinken co-founded one. But not Jake. Jake actually works for Macro Advisory Partners, which has got a London and a New York office, I believe. And it's led by two former British spy chiefs. They make a whole lot of money. And what he did specifically for them was that he consulted for Uber. Okay, you almost can't make that up, right? And they first of all put Sullivan like atop their public relations material, because they really liked his insider influence, so they said that, they boasted that he provides trusted counsel in a turbulent world, because he's got this insider knowledge. But he basically was working for Uber to try to like labor negotiations, try to, deny benefits to contractors, whatever one thinks of that. Doesn't even really matter. But he also was involved in kind of consulting different corporate entities to he was providing, quote, forecasting services to have them kind of jump into the newly opened Iranian economy after the nuclear deal, which was one of his better moves, I guess, but after he had helped to negotiate that. So that's what he did for Macro Advisory. A source that's pretty familiar with the group said that, quote, this is a step up from the military industrial complex, Macro, that is. It's the information industrial complex, And yep, so that's who he worked for. By the way, even when he was significantly involved with work for Macro Advisory as early 2020, so we're talking 7-8 months ago, it never seemed to get into his bio line whenever he wrote an article or whenever, he's got 30 or 40 different bios up on the internet, at all the different places he's like affiliated with. And he pretty much never mentioned Macro Advisory. I don't think that was an oversight.
Yeah, well, yeah, screams conflict of interest, but then I don't know why he would think that anybody would care more than they hold it against anybody else, which they don't seem to. I mean, we do, but nobody with any influence seems to care because they're all in on it too, man.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some limited critical reporting in the mainstream media about these guys and gals. I mean, it's more like they'll say, like if you look at the New York Times or one of those places, what they write about these Biden people is, well, there are some people who are critical and they're critical because of this. You know what I mean? It's more like they'll say, some people are critical of them for their influence and their conflicts of interest and stuff. But why in the world am I, of all people, the person who wrote, I mean, let's be honest, right? I mean, I'm just not tooting my own horn, the most comprehensive and I think the best analysis of Jake Sullivan that exists. I mean, it's the longest, it's the most intense. I did the most research. Why am I doing it? I mean, really, why am I doing it? Why am I doing it for Scheer Post? I love Bob Scheer. I love Scheer Post. Why is this not in the New Yorker or the New York Review of Books or some other long form, journal in the mainstream? Well, there's a reason it's not, and it's what you said, that they're not taking a truly critical eye at these people because they're part of the same tribe. And they like the Jake Sullivans of the world. They want the Jake Sullivans of the world running business as usual because business as usual benefits them. And oh, by the way, they drink at the same cocktail parties and cheat on each other's wives with each other. I mean, I'm being a little flip here, but that's who they are. Let's be clear.
The funny thing about all this too, Danny, is that, people wanted to finally get rid of the sort of centrist, extremist kind of consensus of the Obama-McCain years, and for that matter, the Clinton-Bush years before that. And to have a return to normalcy, right? The peace dividend and all of that great stuff we were supposed to get at the end of the Cold War that we never got because of all of Clinton's expansion and then the terror wars and everything. We wanted the return to normalcy. So the people unelected the Bush-Clinton consensus, but they got Donald Trump. who was a total blowhard idiot and was not really an anti-war guy in any kind of real sense, except like the most kind of crude cartoon of Buchananite America Firstism, but never really followed through with any of it and didn't give us a return to normalcy. And instead, he's such a bombastic kind of freak-ass weird guy that this is now what counts as the return to normalcy, is we go back to the completely bonkers, bananas, treasonous consensus of the Bush, Obama, John McCain years, as though this is how it's all supposed to be. This is what we're supposed to be breathing a sigh of relief to, is that now we're, instead of having, crazy Trump and hawk Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and all these terrible guys, now we're going back to the staid and steady, Bush and Obama, especially more like Obama times, which, if anyone remembers Obama times compared to actual normalcy and peace, it was a time of war and crisis and emergency. But the narrative here is that this is the sigh of relief. This is why everything is going to be okay, because we're right back with the guys who supported Al-Qaeda in Syria.
And normalcy, as it's defined, as you're describing, it's kind of inconvenient to mention. It often results in more death, American soldiers, but mainly foreigners, than even the Trump years. And I'm not omitting the fact that, Trump's support for a number of different kind of proxies and his bombing increases in certain areas, it resulted in enormous amounts of death. But pound for pound, I mean, the Obama obscenity was at least actually worse, right? In many cases, when you throw the fact that he started Yemen, right, or that he green lighted and then supported Yemen, and he started the support for that. So, it's just what kind of country, what kind of society, kind of pines, right? Pines like it's an old high school first love. They pine for this normalcy, which is grotesque, right? What kind of society wants the kind of normalcy that results in a hyper expeditionary interventionism that results in mass murder? I never got a memo about that. I don't remember learning about it in civics class, but that's where we're at today.
Yeah. Well, and you can speak for the American people at large, too. I mean, the average conservative will tell you that we're not supposed to be the policemen of the world. Of course, we got to kick butt to protect ourselves against bad guys when bad guys come at us, but not everything in the world is supposed to be America's business. And most liberals and leftists and progressives, even if they don't prioritize it, are, by default, essentially descendants of the Vietnam era New Left who oppose this kind of thing. It's just the bottom of their agenda. And everybody with actual power and influence, they're all in on with the vested interests. They're the ones who care, There's foreign policy and there's antiwar.com, right? At foreignpolicy.com, it's all by people who are in on it, for people who are in on it. And then at antiwar.com, it's, oh my God, would you look at these people? And then that's it. Nobody else is even interested at all.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it, and accurate, I think, is like you've got the critics like us who, for our sins, care about this so much, and all the people in our lives, or, I can speak for myself, all the people in my life who are like, Danny, just give it a rest, like, I mean, even like women I've been married to, where it's like, why do you care so much? Care less, care more about, whatever, this like day-to-day stuff. So there's us, right, who are just insufferable about it. And then it's the insider class. And that's really it. And you're right. Most people in the middle, it's not particularly high on their agenda for a number of reasons. And we don't get the audience that would be necessary generally to make massive change. And so what happens is that we sort of, as a society, we just defer to the experts, to the cult of qualification, as I've started to call it. Yeah. I'm so sick of hearing that Michelle Flournoy and Jake Sullivan and Avril Haines, oh, well, at least they're qualified. I mean, the good thing about the Biden crew is, they really are qualified. What? What does qualified mean? Like, yes, they are qualified if you accept the rules of the cult, if you accept the rules of what makes you qualified, but I reject that. like the, because they've been complicit in mass murder before, they're qualified to continuing it in the future. I mean, that's what they're really saying, right? I just reject the idea that there aren't better people available, because that's just not true.
Yep.
We circumscribe the number of people that we get to choose from, and then we say, okay, you can have a ham sandwich or you can have a ham and cheese sandwich, and that's it. Which would you like?
Yep. Yeah, and it could have been Buttigieg or Klobuchar or any horrible Democratic senator from somewhere, something like that. It'd have to be Biden, who's just, another one of Bill Clinton's mistresses, basically. No different than Bush or Obama or what this entire, not just a carbon copy of them, but they're all along co-conspirator with them this whole time in getting us into every bit of this in the Clinton years, the Bush years, and the Obama years. It's crazy that it's like this, man.
No, and of course Klobuchar is who Jake worked for first.
Oh,
right?
really? That's funny.
He's from Minnesota. I said that the archetypal Biden bro starts his life out after the Ivy League as like a staffer for usually a pretty prominent congressperson. And so in his case, being from Minnesota, he works for Klobuchar. And Klobuchar tells a new Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, I've got this great guy. He's really awesome. And the rest is history. You can't make it up. You can't make up how incestuous it is.
Yeah. And the only reason I picked her, however bad she is, she was not George W. Bush's handmaiden in getting us into Iraq War II like Biden was. She didn't pass the crime bill that Biden passed just because she wasn't there. Right? I'm not trying to give her any credit. I just
no, of course.
That's all. I just want to be clear about that people understand that. All I mean by that is like it really has to be this particular guy. Co-conspirator with Reagan and Bush and Clinton and Bush and Obama on everything. This is the guy that it has to be, huh? Okay, fine. Doesn't it feel like we're already a year into the Biden administration and we're 4 days into December? You won't even be sworn in for a month and a half still.
I don't know that I can handle just the interpersonal interactions that are required by all this. I mean, if I have to hear another, and I'm not PC, I'm not afraid to say it. Like if I have to hear, because it usually just depending on just because of the circles I run in, and the nature of my life, if I have to hear another white woman, vague liberal, talk to me about like, oh, at least it's not Trump, or at least George W. Bush like loved his family and was a good father. And like, at least we've got qualified people. If I have to hear that again, like there's gonna be an intellectual murder suicide. Like that's just the thing. Like I that's the problem with the Biden years is like I can already see it. Like I'm just gonna have to keep listening to that, and they make you feel like you're crazy. For
what though? I mean, I don't know, man. I was gonna say, the left coalition, the Democrat coalition, which I pretty much divide in half, is like the liberals you just described, the NPR types, and the Democratic Party, and then there's the people to the left of them, the real progressives and socialists and communists and anarchists and stuff who are the real leftists. And I think Obama's kind of personality and blackness and stuff really won over a lot of the left in a way that I think Biden won't be able to do. And a lot of leftists were good on Obama too. I don't mean to say that. A lot of them stayed good on the wars all the way through and stuff. But Joe Biden certainly does not bring the charisma to bear that Obama did as far as winning over the left, their acquiescence or silence, ignoring the wars and that kind of thing. And the good leftist journalists are out for blood on Biden and have been and are hard after him. All the Code Pink people and Max Blumenthal and the Gray Zone Project people and consortiumnews.com and all that. They're not impressed by somebody being a Democrat. They're still our strongest allies and will stay our strongest allies. So there's some hope there that because he really is so much more like John McCain in temperament and identification than Obama was, that, hopefully the left will, feel good about treating him like Lyndon Johnson, really, and not one of them, and somebody to be attacked and diminished by them.
I agree with you. I do think that that's the silver lining of getting, you're saying like, oh my God, like we had to get Biden, and I couldn't agree more. Like it just blows my mind that like we're still in a place in the year 2020 where like Biden is what we're fed, as the best option. But if there is a silver lining, it's that Biden's not gonna fool those people on.
But what they're gonna say too, is let them eat wokeism. Forget economics, forget imperialism, forget bank bailouts and real corruption. Let's talk about how everybody has mean feelings in their heart, and government has to solve that somehow, or God knows what red herring they have for us next,
I mean, I definitely stole his line that he used in our Moderate Rebels interview. But Max Blumenthal said that Biden's going to appoint all the woke warmongers, and it's just a great line, not just because of the alliteration, but I mean it's true though. I mean that's the thing. Like you can't have real debate on serious issues like economics, whatever side you're on, and you can't have real debate about empire, but you can have diversity in your war making. You can have diversity among the war makers. That's
and they'll hide behind it too. I can't believe you're criticizing the Secretary of Defense, you sexist.
Well, it's like that Mickey Young or whatever that I've just been just going off on Twitter. I mean, she's the one who said that it makes her just totally like just a passive aggressive tweet. Like it makes her really uncomfortable when like white cis males are criticizing the uber qualified Michelle Flournoy. And I'm like, wait. So I'm to believe that because someone is a woman or a woman of color, because she was talking about women of color too, then that means she's going to be what? Like more humane and decent and strategic? Like, did you ever read a history book? Like, the first women to be in charge of various countries, like Indira Gandhi was massacring Sikhs, but she was a woman of color. Like that's ridiculous. It's belied by all history. It's just ludicrous.
Well, of course, I mean, and I'm sure that at Georgetown they have an official, name for this or whatever, where Democrats and especially women act extra tough so that you don't call them a Democratic woman. So, look at my muscular foreign policy. I've already started 3 wars, and this is how they build their credibility. And Hillary Clinton, even though she lost to Obama because of how bad she was on Iraq War II, she didn't take that lesson to heart at all. The first thing she did as Secretary of State was figure out where she can escalate the wars. We got to triple in Afghanistan. We got to go to Libya. We got to do Syria and all of these things to prove what a muscular foreign policy she had, because she was going to run on that in 2016. And of course, by 2016, it was like, what foreign policy? I wasn't Secretary of State. I don't know what you're talking about. Libya, never heard of it. But in 2011, the lesson of 2008 was completely lost on her. You know what I need? A muscular foreign policy, so then everyone will think I'm a tough guy. That's what they like, tough guys, even though she just lost because of that exact same thinking.
Absolutely. Again, and it's not polite to mention what you're describing, but it's true that there is a tendency, and it's been demonstrated historically over and over again, especially early on, the first women to many times take these positions or take over these roles. They do feel, it appears, what you're describing, this need to be tough. And it's not unlike what I've called the Democrats' dilemma all the time, which is, this idea that, if the Republicans are being tough on something, then I've got to show how tough I am, and it's like, but it doesn't work, because in other words, if by the way, the Republicans aren't always more hawkish than the Democrats either historically, but in the cases where they are, like in the Bush years, Kerry's like, well, I have to be tough on these things, otherwise they're going to swift boat me. And it's like, well, they're going to swift boat you anyway, buddy. You know what I mean? So just why don't you just say what you really believe to the extent that you believe anything. But this is definitely what happens.
Yeah, exactly. I'll prove how tough I am by rolling right over to these tougher men than me. Yeah, okay. Same thing Obama did. Same thing Donald Trump did. The generals are going to call you weak. Oh, well, we can't have that. Well, I don't know. How about you take the general in front of the camera and then slap him with your open hand and tell him, I wear the pants, you work for me.
You
And
know,
then everyone will say, wow, what a tough guy. He ended that war over that general's dead body.
see, I love that idea. During World
That's what
War
I would
II,
do.
yeah, that's why we need you. That's why we need you in the Oval, you know? But I'm serious. I mean, generals don't get fired enough. That's a controversial opinion that shouldn't be controversial. In World War II, George Marshall, on behalf of FDR, fired, oh, I don't remember the number, but it's a lot. We're talking like over a dozen division level and above commanders just because, like for incompetence. Just up, I don't like the way you're doing X, you're fired. And like no one batted an eye. Whereas like now, when McKiernan was fired in Afghanistan, it was the first time a theater had been commander had been fired like in forever, and it was like this story. Like these guys serve at your pleasure. I don't like I wouldn't be afraid of them in that sense. Like, oh, okay, well, I don't really you're not supporting my policy, or you're sort of working behind the scenes to you know to work working against it. You're trying to scuttle it. Like you're gone. That's it.
Yep.
No big deal.
And we
I don't
do
see why
know,
that's
by
such
the
a
way,
problem.
like this isn't just an accusation. We know from very solid reporting in the case of Obama and Trump both, and especially on the issue of Afghanistan, that this was exactly what was at stake. If you don't do this, they're going to call you weak. So do the tough guy thing and roll over and escalate the war, because escalating wars are tough. And both of them gave into that logic when all they had to do was be tough by winning the fight against the generals. In fact, quite unlike Obama, Trump was reported to have screamed in the generals' faces that you guys suck and you haven't won a war since 1945 and I spit on your mama's grave and how do you like that? But then did what they wanted anyway, just insulted them. When what he should have been doing was praising them to high heaven as he ended the wars, something like that. Slap him if he has to. But instead he berated them and insulted them and turned them all against him, but then went along with what they wanted anyway.
Exactly.
Ridiculous.
I mean, there really hasn't been a case where a general or where a president has stood up to his generals in both rhetoric and action. There hasn't been that since the Second World War. Not really. I mean, I guess you could say Truman and MacArthur, but even that, that didn't really work out for a number of reasons. But I mean, it was the right call, but MacArthur ended up coming home a hero, and there were all the issues with Truman himself. Oh, by the way, Truman, that's who Jake Sullivan listed as his political hero, his political inspiration. Of all the human beings, from Cleopatra to Clinton,
Right.
That's how vague the question was.
Yeah, because he proves that Democrats aren't all a bunch of sissies. Tough guy Truman.
That alone, like honestly, that was his 40 under 40 profile for Time Magazine, Sullivan's. That answer alone, to me, just that he's not qualified. Like that, like right there, I'm like, we need somebody different for nationals. If that's all I knew about him, that he said that was his political
Right.
hero, I'm like, all right, let's go to the next person. Like speed dating. Give me a new
Right.
national security advisor,
Right. Unless he said, listen, no, I'm totally against everything he did in World War II and Korea and the atom bombs and all of that. I just like that he desegregated the armed forces, that's all. Or something like that. Okay, I'll listen to the rest of the sentence, but that's not what he meant. It was the firebombing that he approved of. Decisive,
Right. Even if you wanted to be woke or you wanted to, virtue signal in some way, like you couldn't have just picked a cliche like Martin Luther King or something. Like it had to be Truman. Like you couldn't. There's just so many options. But
It also, well, it does go to show that, like, what's he going to say? Bill Clinton? I mean, how many? It's not like he's got really a lot. Hey, Walter Mondale was a towering figure of leadership on our part. He's got to go back to find somebody who, just because time has washed away the truth of things, that he can invoke as somebody who's worth respecting.
Well, it's like I think what Sullivan really meant to answer to that question. Like Truman was just the name he picked, but the real answer he would have given is, oh, my political hero is whoever is the polar opposite of Mike Dukakis in that picture wearing the helmet and stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that's what his real answer was. Is like my political hero is not that. Whatever's not that, but still a Democrat, that's who I'm for.
Yep.
But yeah, that's the story.
Yeah. Well, and you got to admit, I mean, that calculation seems to work for them over and over again, because liberals just cannot be made. It's not just the people in D.C. I mean, I was giving them too much credit before. The leftists are good, but the liberals, they have that same thing about, oh, look at me. I support a muscular foreign policy because, you know, in other ways I'm a socialist, but I don't want you to think I'm not a patriot, so I'll be a warmonger. And then that'll, you know, secure my bona fides as a real American.
That's right. So they keep tacking to these liberal hawks. And
yeah, by the way, source, Truman, I'm an Austinite. That's how I know that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and, you know, Truman's considered the archetypal liberal hawk. I mean, they sort of largely coined the phrase around him, and this is who they go to. It can win elections, I guess. It can have political benefits, but the republic doesn't benefit from tacking in that direction. The world doesn't, right? Certainly, by any measure. But you know, I don't think Jake Sullivan really cares about that. I really do not think, because I'm telling you, man, he doesn't care about people.
Okay, now here's the thing, though. We're out of countries to attack that can't hit us back, right? I mean, what's he going to do? They're not going to start a war with Iran. They're terrified of starting a war with Iran. The services don't want, you know, the chiefs, they don't want a war with Iran. China
Absolutely.
is fun to pretend and have a Cold War against, but they could also destroy every major city in America in one day, and so that's not good. So what are they going to do? Pick a fight with India? They got nukes. Guess they could pick a fight with Brazil, except Brazil is closely allied to the United States right now.
Right.
So maybe that'll keep the peace, is that Bush and Obama have already just exhausted the list.
Yeah, no, I think what we'll see is like the low intensity kind of diversionary wars, low intensity for us, high intensity for the people dying. I do think that we'll see like a continuation of that. I would keep an eye on Africa.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's where I think of like the 25 to 30 countries where the U.S. is like actively advising a war zone or a conflict. I want to say the plurality is now in Africa. I would keep an eye out there. You'll see kind of that low level continuation, I think, of the
and hopefully not
there,
Eastern Europe.
Oh God, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah. Well, anyway, Scott, sorry if you have to edit this, but I got to run. I have a radio here in a minute.
Right on, man. Okay, well, thanks.
So
appreciate it again, Danny.
Yeah, and I'll be in touch more about your book. And thanks a lot for having me.
Hell yeah. Okay, guys, that is Danny Sjursen, and his latest is Biden's Young Hawk, the case against Jake Sullivan. And he's right. It really is the worst thing written about the guy so far. So check it out at SheerPost and at antiwar.com. The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.